Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here, and welcome to the very first episode of Gold Goes to the Movies. Even that title's not entirely true. It had alliteration in it, so I kind of liked it. And yes, I will go to the cinema and we'll talk about brand new releases at the cinema and we'll review them, we'll discuss them as much as we can. I want to try and do spoiler-free reviews as much as possible because I don't want to ruin it for people who are going to watch them. But I guess I could have called it The Movies Go to Gold, but that doesn't really make any sense. But what I mean by that is that a lot of the films we're talking about nowadays are on streaming services, new stuff that's released straight to direct to streaming. It could just be any movie I just happen to have watched in a week, which you're very going to quickly find out with this very first episode. A string of films that I have watched over the last 2 to 3 weeks. It may have been at the cinema. It may be on the likes of Amazon, Netflix, even Disney Plus, Apple. It could be any of those, or it could just be on regular TV. It could be on Sky, or whatever your equivalent is, whatever country you're in. Because yes, I am very much a night owl. I can stay up hours past everyone else in the house because I've got myself just in that moment where you end up having to watch a film to its conclusion, regardless of how good it is. And sometimes it can be a movie I've watched a million times, like Rain Man. Rain Man is, for some reason, on British TV, is always on late at night on one of the kind of just regular channels. And I find myself desperately trying to flick past it, and you just turn it on, that's it, you're done. You're hooked. I can watch that film from any point onwards. So yeah, you might have already noticed by the whole backdrop and everything about this, these videos are going to be very raw and unpolished. They're one-take videos. You won't see any editing. It is just me just chatting whatever comes out of my brain, good or bad. I also do videos about football, soccer, as you might call it in America. And anyone that's watched those will know exactly what I'm like. Anything can come out of my mouth. Like I say, there's no fancy graphics, no polished kind of editing to it, no one telling you to hit like or subscribe or whatever, although I kind of have just done that inadvertently. And it is just me sitting on a sofa talking about things. Even this backdrop, I kind of put my little R2 up there. Originally, when I set up this video and kind of started to just frame what would be behind me, I had loads of little movie kind of bits and pieces chucked along the back of the sofa behind me. It looked weird. It looked like I was in a toy shop. It looked very odd. So what I might end up doing is just putting one little thing each week on that side behind me. But yeah, it is. I'm going to stutter. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to say the odd word at time. There's going to be the odd mistake I'm going to make because I just don't have the technical capability either to go back and fix it. So it's as simple as that. It is. I kind of always see them as a bit like a podcast recording in a way, but just in video format, or even I guess a live stream that's pre-recorded. Yeah, I will especially mispronounce people's names. That is one of the worst things for me. I absolutely murder pronunciation of names. So feel free in the comments to tell me how I should have said it to help me the next time it comes along. But yeah, it's just going to be chatting about something I love, which is movies. I'm a film geek, nerd, buff, whatever you want to call them. It's just, like I say, we live in a world where there's so much access to movies now. And, I remember the days, it feels like a long time ago, when you had VHS and you would wait so long for films to come out. And nowadays, they're just there, especially with the whole direct-to-streaming world that we live in, with various films or films that now have a shorter window in the cinema. The access to us is ridiculous. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is a whole other subject. But for me, like I say, it just opens the whole world to me to essentially lose a lot of my life to watching movies. So yeah, we're going to talk about them all. And this first one's going to be a bit of a bumper one. Probably the videos aren't going to be as long as this one's going to be. Hopefully it's not going to be too long and take up too much of your time. But purely because it's the first one, I was trying to think back over the last 2 to 3 weeks and what I've watched. And And whether that's Roadhouse, it's just been released on Amazon, whether that's Dune Part 2, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire in the cinema, whether that's Poor Things, which I only managed to get round to watching recently on Disney Plus, or The Creator, another film that I managed to see in recent days, or even, as I alluded to earlier, a really old film from the 80s, which a real classic that I've somehow never got round to watching until a couple of days ago, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Honestly, there's probably some people thinking, how in the world have you not managed to watch that? And then even just little ones, just like last night, I wasn't even going to include them in this, but I thought, why not have just a very briefest mention of them. Bleed for this, which I think I watched on Amazon, and The Brits Are Coming, which I think is also called The Con Is On. We're going to, as you can tell by that little list, there's going to be varying degrees of quality, varying degrees of entertainment, lots of different stars, lots of, very different quality. We'll stick with that. That's the best way to put it. I'm quite a positive person. I try to find the enjoyment in everything I can. There are some movies you just really can't. You really can't. But I will always watch a movie to its end. I've got that weird habit. However awful it is, I have to watch it to the very, very final moments. Even of the credits. I watch all the way to the credits. It's a weird thing in a cinema. And it's not because of end credit scenes or anything like that. Maybe it's this kind of weird mark of respect to those people far more talented than I who can put together a movie, regardless of how good or bad it was. Yeah, it's a very strange kind of ways I have about me. So let's start with Roadhouse, which, if you're not aware, they call it reimagining nowadays, don't they? It's seems to be remake's a bad word. Reimagining of the 1989 movie that, of course, starred Patrick Swayze and various others, including Sam Elliott, who's a brilliant actor. 2024 version switches the action from Missouri to the Florida Keys, which I think works for it. Gives it a little bit of a different vibe. Kind of has that real beach setting to it as well, in the water. It is very cool. Weirdly, despite again it being a bit of a classic of the Swayze career, I only saw the original Roadhouse probably about 5 years ago for the first time. Yes, I don't know why it took me that long, because I loved it. It's cool, it's daft, it's silly, it's fun, and it's probably is the coolest Swayze performance. Probably just pipping Point Break for me. Obviously, there's a lot of love out there for Ghost and Dirty Dancing, of course, and Donnie Darko, other roles he had across his career. But for me, Roadhouse, probably, feel free to tell me I'm absolutely wrong, but Roadhouse is probably Swayze at his coolest for me. And yeah, I'm a big fan of and it's a very specific genre, stranger goes into a small town. I just am. I don't know why. There's something so cool about it, and that's maybe what appealed to me about Roadhouse once I eventually watched it. That's what appeals to me about the new one. And you see it in various things. I mean, like the first series of Reacher, the series, that's got that vibe about it, and I love that. Just kind of disturbing the equilibrium and people underestimating. I do like that. So on this reimagining remake, it's fun. It's fun. It's brutal. It's daft, but it's fun. You've got to switch your brain. Of course you have. If you go in thinking this is an Oscar-worthy piece of cinema, you're going to be disappointed. If you go in there with the spirit of the original and just think to yourself, yeah, I'm going to switch my brain off for a couple of hours and just kind of allow myself to be entertained, you will be. It's good. Jake Gyllenhaal he's brilliant. He's so watchable in everything he does. And on this one, he just carries it on his shoulders. They've kept the name Dalton. He is Dalton, as Patrick Swayze was. And he's just got this. He's a different Dalton to the Swayze's one. He's probably a little bit. It's difficult. I was about to say less tough, but he's clearly not, because in this one he is a former UFC fighter. But he's just got that more accessible, maybe. I don't know. There's a little bit more humour to it. He's very polite. It's a fascinating kind of character he's created. He's got great timing, delivery, and he is ridiculously in shape. For a man who is of similar age to me, very much you watch it going, yeah, fair play. It's directed by Doug Liman, this film. Uh, he knows how to handle dialogue. He did Swingers back in the day. He knows how to, of course, do action because he did Bourne Identity, Edge of Tomorrow, which I love. That's a terrific film as well in terms of the action elements. And you can see that in this film. There's lots of different techniques. The fight scenes they kind of veer from the technically brilliant. I'm only going to go as far as to say a slapping scene outside the roadhouse. And it's very, very cool. It's very simple, but very cool. And it goes from those to the kind of hyper-realistic, stylized fights, which you can see little elements of computer work in them. They're cool. But, as I say, you've got to suspend your belief a bit. You are going to have fights where you think, no way on earth are you going to survive that. Absolutely. Once you get that into your head, there's a little bit of comic book nature to it. There are things that happen to characters and you think, there is no way on earth you would not be mangled right now. But somehow you are getting up and fighting like a UFC fighter. So once you get your brain away from that, it's good fun. It is. It does. It hangs all together pretty well as long as you remember to switch that off. I think that's the key thing. The women involved are underused. I did feel that. Daniela Melchior, obviously from the Suicide Squad. Sorry, you're going to realise I say obviously a lot for no apparent reason. She's a character. It is there. It could be fully fleshed. It could be a little bit more to it. Jessica Williams as the bar owner. She's so good in Shrinking. The Apple series with Jason Segel and Harrison Ford. And she's so good in that. She is wasted in this film. She's got amazing comic timing. I would have loved to see a lot more for her to do. Yeah, woefully underused. So, yeah, the two ladies, they could have had a lot more screen time in this, but I guess this is kind of Jake Gyllenhaal's movie. As I guess the original Roadhouse was Patrick Swayze's vehicle. This is very much Jake Gyllenhaal's one. Billy Magnussen pops up as the son of the baddie, which, he's good. He kind of brings that bad guy vibe to it. Joachim de Emilda, sorry, there you go, pronunciation of foreign names, horrendous at it. He pops up in his regular villain role. He's rocked up in so many movies as the bad guy, and you can kind of add this one, although it's a little bit of it, is he, isn't he? Ooh, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you have Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor in his acting debut, which is manic, I think is probably the best way to put it. Look, the fight scenes, of course, incredible. That's where he's at his most comfortable. You see a lot of Conor McGregor, a lot of him, on a couple of occasions. More so than I expected going in to watch the film. His performance, it's a difficult one. There's an element of playing up to the caricature that is Conor McGregor while also bringing in this kind of psychotic character as well. There are elements of it where he is genuinely menacing. There are elements of it where he's quite amusing. There are also elements that are very pantomime and a bit silly and hammy. And look, you can tell it's a guy from a very different discipline making his first steps into a new role, I guess. We've seen a lot of kind of wrestlers go into cinema, and maybe that's an easier transition because there is such a performance element to it. Whereas someone like Conor McGregor, I guess, is a bit of both in his world. But obviously, yeah, it's a whole different thing, UFC to wrestling as well. And it just about works. Just about. With Conor McGregor in there. It's kind of... It borders on a gimmick of the movie, having him in there. But the end fight scene, which he is involved in, is very good. It is very good. And I'm intrigued to see where his career goes, whether he follows down his path, where he can kind of bring a bit of nuance and different kind of characters to his stuff. But yeah, it's one of those where you're just very aware it's Conor McGregor. And I don't think that's exactly what an actor probably wants you to do, but it is his first stab at it. So we'll see where it goes. But it's a good film in terms of its fun. it's like I say, not going to win any awards, but it sets out, I think, what it wants to do. And it kind of got to the end of it and thought, I'd probably watch another one of those. It does set itself up to, I wouldn't say it sets itself up to say, oh, there's going to be a sequel or anything like that, but it allows itself to maybe continue the idea of putting a stranger into a small town, that kind of thing, and maybe you could get more out of it. So I think Jake Gyllenhaal was kind of alluded to that he wouldn't mind doing again or making a part of like a world of it. As it were. Everything's got to be a world now, is it? A universe of things. But it's good. It is. I recommend it, as long as you go in with those expectations of what's going to be coming along. Next up, Dune Part 2. Very different film to Roadhouse. I had to go to the cinema. I caught it a little bit late in its cinema run, which is why otherwise it wouldn't even be in this video. I felt like I had to get it on the big screen before it left. I watched the first Dune, or Dune Part 1 anyway, on my TV. I missed its cinema run. And the first time, I think it did detract a little bit from it. I deliberately rewatched it before I went to the cinema to watch Part 2, which I think was a very important thing because I liked it a lot more on the second viewing. I probably noticed a lot more. Yeah, I made up for it big time though with Part 2, which is made for the screen. It is a cinematic spectacle. It's created and crafted for you to see on the biggest screen possible, and that's, yeah, it does its job. I vaguely remember the original film, the 1984 one from David Lynch. I haven't watched it in many, many years, probably since I was a kid. I remember certain scenes freaking me out a bit when I was probably too young to watch it. I deliberately didn't go back and rewatch that one though, because I kind of wanted this one to have its own, I'm going to use that word again, universe, the kind of thing that it exists in. And I haven't read the original books either by Frank Herbert, so I'm kind of coming into it, with a fresh palette, as it were, not kind of judging it on what it did or didn't bring from the book series. And you know what? It's fantastic. It's such a good film. It just looks wonderful. It gets the story right. The performances are spot on as well. And it kind of, that's the thing. Sometimes you'll get some beautiful looking films and they don't have the story and performances to back it up. Of course, the story was already there from the books, but that doesn't always make for a good film. You know, sometimes you can take a beautiful, kind of beautifully written book or a rich lore of books, and they can still absolutely mess up what they do when they bring it to screen. But yeah, Denis Villeneuve, again, I looked up how to pronounce that because it was such a strange one. I think he pronounces it Denis. So maybe Denis Villeneuve. He pulls it all together. We know he can handle the big effects. Obviously did Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, which I really liked. Obviously a big fan of the original Blade Runner. See, I said obviously for no apparent reason. So you know he can handle these kind of big tentpole pictures, but also have something more to them, something beneath the surface. And look, there's so many stars in this film. It's crazy. Timothée Chalamet, a hell of a year. Not the worst of years, is it, for young Timothy? Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Austin Butler. This is not Elvis, Austin Butler. Do not go in thinking you're going to see anything like Elvis. Pretty much mainly because he has absolutely zero hair, I think, on his... I was about to say his entire body. I don't know about that. Certainly from the shoulders up. Florence Pugh's in it as well. Dave Bautista, Léa Seydoux, Stellan Skarsgård, Charlotte Rampling, Christopher Walken. It's just an incredible cast list. Probably the one I was probably most disappointed by the lack of screen time was Christopher Walken. He kind of rocks up, looks a bit pained by it all, and just that's it, and heads off. Well, I can't really say anything, can I? That's the point of spoiler free. Yeah, it's but the performances are all on point. Yeah, it's just really good. I mean, it's 2 hours and 46 minutes, so it really could be a film that could feel like a you could get a pain in the backside. You could be running out of your popcorn. You could feel like it lasts forever. As some, films that have kind of gone on and on recently, especially on streaming, maybe with the not just streaming actually. To be fair, cinema as well. Obviously, the Avatar, Way of the Water was a very long film, but it moves along. Dune Part 2 at a decent pace. It does. It's. I love the fact that there's also, and I don't think this is spoilery, but there's between two of the characters, there's a bit of a shift in the dynamic and who the protagonist is, and I love that. It's very kind of subtle, and then you realise like, that's quite cool. And obviously, the point of these kind of films with such a, especially ones that are set in times of war, invasion, whatever, you're never entirely sure are the good guys as good as they make out, or the bad guys as bad as they are meant to be. What's the overriding scheme to it all? And the scene with the sandworms, you'll have seen bits of it in the trailers. For me, one of the best visuals I've ever seen put on screen. Certainly in recent years, but it is. I think Spielberg maybe came out and said something similar recently as well. So I'm in good company there. It is, just brilliant. I really would recommend it. If you can get to the cinema, please do. Please, I implore you, go and see it on the biggest screen. If you can go and see it in IMAX, do. I didn't, but I would imagine in IMAX it's absolutely incredible. And if you've just got to wait till it comes on telly, watch it on the biggest TV screen possible. Even if that means going around your mates or someone else's. Let them know first. That would be weird if they suddenly came down in the middle of the night and you're watching their massive 74-inch TV or whatever it is. That would be weird. Get permission first. But honestly, it's a story that's kind of got it all. It moves on so much from part one. You could argue with, I guess, with a cast that size, with certain people maybe you don't see too much of. Florence Pugh, she's definitely one you don't see too much of. Léa Seydoux, definitely. Charlotte Rampling probably got more of an impact in the first movie. But they make the most of their screen time. Like I say, Chris Falcon, probably the one for me, a little bit like, could have done a little bit more with that. Again, there probably has been so much cut out of the movie as well and edited, so I'm not kind of obviously blaming him. And there's certainly been actors that have come out since saying that they were in the movie and have been cut out of it. So I'm probably doing him a disservice there. Obviously, one of the icons of cinema. Sorry, Christopher, not that you're ever going to watch this, but it's fantastic. It really is. That's definitely a film that I think when more people have watched it, I might dig into a bit deeper and do a review with some kind of more spoilers. The other movie that I went to see at the cinema in the last week, which also has a lot of characters in it, was Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Straight off the bat, got to hold my hands up. Huge Ghostbusters fan. Absolutely love Ghostbusters. I loved the first one as a child. I imagine, thinking back, I probably would have watched it when it came on video. It came out in 1984, so I was probably too young to be in the cinema watching them, so it would have been on VHS. I loved the second one. Even if it wasn't as well received, for me, I kind of probably, I'd imagine the way they came about 5 years in between, I'd probably watched them as a bit of a 1-2. There was less of a gap for me. I always remember that as a kid, being so amazed when a video came or a film came out and you got to see it 5-6 years on or whatever, and you just, Lethal Weapon's a great example. I watched the first, Lethal Weapon was given to me by my parents' friends. Far too young I was, far too young. And obviously there's some scenes of nudity in there and things like that, which I was definitely at the age of, it was like, woo! It was not what I probably should have been seeing at that age. And I had years of watching this video. I loved it. Murtaugh and Riggs are brilliant. And then they brought out Lethal Weapon 2. And it just blew my mind that you would have a sequel to something I'd watched so many times over such a long period of time. And then suddenly there was another one. But I digress. I will do a lot of that. I apologise. I'll try and keep it on point. Back to Ghostbusters. Yes, I watched the first one, watched the second one to death. Watched the real Ghostbusters, the cartoon as a kid. I used to love that as well. Wasn't massively a fan of the 2016 reboot, the Melissa McCarthy-led one with Paul Feige. It wasn't a bad film. It had some good moments, had some nice little kind of nostalgic touches. And the reaction, I think, to it was a bit over the top. It really was. But I think, personally, as such a Ghostbusters fan, I just wanted the original films to continue. And for me, it was a bit like, it's not even in the same world. You've brought back some of the original actors and chucked them into different character roles. It just didn't feel necessary. That was my issue with it, and that's not to detract from it as a film. Like I say, some good little moments and certain actors in it were better than others, I felt, in terms of their performances, and there were some nice little scary moments, which I think you need in the Ghostbusters films. But I think I was just so desperate for a continuation of the original Ghostbusters that it was a bit like, oh, okay. But then, then Ghostbusters Afterlife came along, 3 years ago? And it was exactly what I was ready for. Jason Reitman did his dad proud. It was a fresh story, new characters, but grounded in that original's world. Had a lot of heart. Like I say, had some real scares, which you need in these movies. And yeah, I think people forget that about the original. It's got a lot of moments where you're like, like this, the library scene right at the beginning, which there may or may not be a little reference to in this latest one. But yeah, I really liked Afterlife. I know it wasn't for everyone, but for me, it had this kind of, like I say, heart to it. And obviously the original Ghostbusters came back into it towards the end. It just kind of worked for me. I really enjoyed it. So that brings us to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which there's been a bit of a swap around 3 years later. Ivan Reitman is no longer directing this time. He's gone back into a writer-producer role, and Gil Keenan, who was one of the writers of Afterlife, has stepped up into the directing shoes. First off the bat, it has got plenty of charm. It's not as good as Afterlife for me, I would say. I don't think it quite hits the beats like that did. There's far too much exposition to it, lots of talking about stuff that isn't really necessary, and it slows it down in sections when you just kind of want to move the plot on rather than really discussing everything. And it is cluttered with characters. Talk about Dune, that's got a lot of actors, a lot of characters in it, but it is kind of spaced over 2 hours 45 or so. Ghostbusters, they try and cram it all into under 2 hours, and for me personally, there's probably 3, maybe even 4 minor characters you could have easily lost from the film, and it wouldn't have suffered for it. There's one kind of plot line in particular, one character that if you took it out, you'd probably give yourself about 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes or more to kind of put to better use. It's just always kind of, that was always kind of takes me back to when Spielberg made Raiders of the Lost Ark. He'd just come off of 1941, was it? When he went over budget, overly long production, and he had to just go into Raiders of the Lost Ark and make the quickest, best film he could, and it gave it its amazing pace because of that. And that's, I think, sometimes they don't get in modern films or slightly bloated blockbuster films, is that almost like less the better sometimes. You can kind of rollick along at a really good pace. Could have had a bit more of the original Ghostbusters, I kind of felt. Look, you get more of them, not as much as I would like. Afterlife, they were very much, I felt, kind of glorified cameos there for the end, as it were, with obviously the late Harold Ramis, touched on very nicely, I felt, the way they dealt with him in Afterlife. I'd say in Frozen Empire, Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz gets a fair bit more to do, certainly a lot more than Afterlife, and he is kind of almost one of the main characters, almost, not quite. Ernie Hudson's Winston Zeddemore, he's got a decent role, again, I'd say probably bigger, and he's a decent presence throughout. Bill Murray definitely still remains in the glorified cameo role for me. I don't know whether it was because shooting schedules or he just didn't want to do as much of it. I don't know. But you can kind of imagine it probably didn't take too long to film his parts, which is a shame because when he's in it, he's terrific. And he's got that Venkman charm and charisma, and his little moments with Annie Potts, Janine Melnitz are lovely. And interestingly, he's been very heavily promoting it since. And if you kind of remember your Ghostbusters history, he was quite resistant to sequels for Ghostbusters in the past. The main reason they couldn't really get a third one up and running for so many decades I think was mainly because Bill Murray was quite resistant to it. That was certainly one of the aspects. There are other aspects. There was a budgetary issue, I remember, in one that they were going to do where it was kind of set in a hellish version of New York where everything was like the bad version. A bit like kind of you see with Stranger Things now. I think that was one of the ideas. But certainly, yeah, he could have been in it a little bit more for me because he's fantastic when he is in on the screen. No Sigourney Weaver this time. She did obviously pop up in a little post-credit sequence in Afterlife. Apparently, it's just because it was too big a cast. That was all it was. She said that, and I think the director said that as well. And they had to make room for her. Some of the newer characters over her, which, again, I'd have rather had her in it. She's a terrific actress, Sigourney Weaver, and Dana Barrett was a brilliant character. There's a little nod to her character at one point. See if you can spot it. It's a real shame Rick Moranis, obviously, is no longer kind of in the public eye so much anymore. He obviously, quite famously, back in the 90s, stepped away really from big roles after the 2 Ghostbusters films, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as well, because his wife died and he kind of had to look after his kids, and that became his focus. He popped back into the kind of limelight, was it about 10 years on? And was doing like little bits of animated voiceover work, writing and things like that. But he's never really come back into the kind of sphere as an actor, which is a shame because I would love to see him pop up in one of these couple of films. William Atherton is back as well as Walter Peck, which is very cool. He kind of had this niche, didn't he, in the 80s of being the annoying guy in movies. You know, he did it in Ghostbusters, did it in Die Hard as well. It's very cool that he's back. And then, of course, you've got a bunch of characters, obviously led by Paul Rudd. He's always got good moments. He's great on the screen. He's got that way about him, hasn't he? His relationship with Carrie Coon is very good as well. They kind of bounce off each other quite nicely with the humour. There's a nice moment when he essentially talks through the theme tune of Ghost. It's very kind of nods towards itself. It's very cleverly takes a lot of the stuff that came out of Ghostbusters in culture and uses it as the culture of within that world as well. It's very cleverly done. So yeah, he's good fun. And I like the fact that you kind of just get to see what the daily life of Ghostbusters like. It's very nerdy of me, but it's fun. Finn Wolfhard's got a bit less work to do in this one. He mainly has to deal with a certain green ghost that you might be well aware of. McKenna Grace gets a lot to do. She's a great young actress. I remember being blown away by her and Gifted. She was so good in that when she was much younger. But yeah, she's good. She's a very good young actress, and I think we'll be talking about her for years to come in stuff. Yeah, superb. So like I say, could have been better, could have been tightened up, but it's still got, for me, enough charm, dollops of nostalgia. Some people have said too much, but I love all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's got a good ending. I like the way it builds toward its ending. It's got a decent baddie, and the end for me is a really decent ending, which kind of makes up for any little inadequacies along the way. I'm intrigued to see kind of how it does box office wise. It's got a little bit more than Afterlife in its opening weekend. Past the $1 billion mark now, the franchise has, all of Ghostbusters films. I wonder if there'll be a third film. I would imagine if it keeps its head of steam going, it will. There were lots of families watching it at my screening, which is interesting because for young kids, it's going to be some moments they're going to be a little bit scared. But I think on the whole, I think it's a 12 over here in the UK, so I think it's probably just about at that level where you can, take a decent family of kids in there, and yeah, I'm intrigued to see how it does because I would definitely watch the third one. I would, and it's one of those films where I think, like some of the blockbusters you see today, where the disparity between the reviewers' scores on Rotten Tomatoes and the audience one is different. The audience score is 84% before I started this video. I had a little look, which is, the reviews are a bit mixed, very mixed, I think it's fair to say, but 84% kind of shows, I think, that the audience might keep coming in to watch this one as well. I was so nostalgic when I got back. I watched the Sky were very kind of cleverly, cynically, whatever you want to call it, showing the other first two films, and I watched them back to back, and I still maintain the second one is better than people give it credit for, even if it's got a horrendous Bobby Brown cameo, which I completely forgot about until I watched it. So now just to kind of tidy up towards the end, just some quick reviews of little bits and pieces I've seen on TV as well in the last couple of days. Like I said, Poor Things, Disney Plus. That was actually a couple of weeks ago, to be fair. I managed to watch that. I think it was the day before the Oscars, just to make sure I'd seen as many of the Oscar-nominated films as I can. If you haven't watched it by now, it is the story of Bella Baxter, a young woman who is brought back to life by a scientist, albeit with a bit of a twist. It's based on a novel from 1993 by Alistair Gray. Visually, it's incredible. It's stunning. It is a treat for the eyes. The director, Yorgos Lanthimos, he's got that kind of style about his movies. I love the fact that it's kind of takes you into this almost sci-fi like world where you don't know whether you're in the past, whether you're in the present, or whether you're in the future. There's such a blend of styles and designs. One minute you suddenly think you're looking, a century or so ago, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, no, that doesn't really fit. And it's just this kind of fantastical world he creates. Emma Stone is brilliant. Absolutely can see why she got the Oscar. It's a remarkable, but it's a very brave role as well. She has to expose herself in every sense of the word as an actress. I should stress, if you're not comfortable with seeing, how do I put this, rude stuff in a movie, do not watch this. If you're not comfortable watching that sort of stuff in a movie with any certain people, don't watch this movie with them. Make sure you're watching it with someone who it's not going to be weird with, because there is no holding back on her character's journey. Of course, there's a whole deeper debate to be had about that journey. Obviously, it comes from a male director, how quickly Bella's brain is advancing from kind of like a childlike state. But that's a whole bigger, deeper discussion for people far more intelligent than me to look at. I've seen kind of debates about it, the male gaze and stuff like that, about how appropriate it is. But I think just taking it in terms of the actors themselves and their performances, Emma Stone is fantastic. I thought Mark Ruffalo was magnificent. Maybe in any other year he might have been closer to getting that Best Supporting Actor award, because I just think he's got an arc in the movie that's just wonderful. Where he starts off and where he ends up at is two very entirely different things. He plays it fantastically. Willem Dafoe's good fun as well. Scientist and father of sorts to Bella. He has an accent which I think is Scottish. Bearing in mind I've got a Glaswegian mother, you can kind of understand that if I'm saying I think it's Scottish, it kind of shows that he's a little bit all over the place. But yeah, no, he's good fun. It's a good performance. That aside, Rami Youssef I thought was very good as well, as Max McCandles, who falls in love with Bella. It's just a fascinating movie that is weird, and there's lots of moments where you're going to go, oh, and there's lots of moments where you go, really? But it all hangs together, and I was absolutely absorbed by it. I really was. It's fascinating. So bit late to the party on that one, but if you haven't seen it, I do recommend giving it a go. But like I say, do not watch it with anyone you might be embarrassed about watching slightly rude stuff in, because there's a fair few scenes that are very like, whoa. What else have I watched? The Creator, also on Disney Plus. Poor Things, came out last year, directed by Gareth Edwards. Obviously is known for Rogue One, albeit with a little help from Tony Gilroy towards the end, the creator of Andor. Godzilla as well was another one he did, Gareth Edwards. And it was a lot better than I expected. I think it's because there wasn't really much of a buzz about it at the time. The reviews were kind of okay. They weren't amazing reviews. And I just watched it and I was like, the special effects were some of the most incredible I've seen. Obviously, Dune Part 2 is just ridiculous, but it had a big budget. You can see kind of where that's come from. But the creator's budget was only, I think it was about £63 million. And what Gareth Edwards has managed to put on that screen is just incredible. And bearing in mind, this is kind of, it's a war between humans and robots with artificial intelligence. So your special effects have got to be on point. They are. Godzilla -1 beat it to the visual effects Oscar, and that is obviously an incredible film itself. But yeah, they're remarkable, and apparently they were done without a green screen. Just they kind of shot it guerrilla style with the camera, and then afterwards ILM added in the elements, and yeah, it's far better than I kind of was expecting it to be. John David Washington is a strong lead. He's very good as a character with a bit of depth to it because he finds himself on both sides of the war. You've got solid kind of character actors in there as well. Alison Janney, Ken Watanabe, Gemma Chan, and young Madeline Una Voiles is very good as the young girl who might just be the most powerful weapon possible. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was, I just don't understand why more wasn't made of it at the time. Especially, it just kind of creates this entire world from so little. Yeah, there's little pacing issues with it at times, but I was very much drawn into it and kind of emotionally connected with it towards the end as well. It's very good, very good. Continuing the kind of fast, quick theme and various things is my step back in time movie. Maybe I'll do one of those each video. That'd be quite cool. Just one that I really should have watched and never did. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's came out in 1982, many years ago, but somehow I've never seen it. Directed by Amy Heckerling, who I was saying more recent times, it's still a long time ago, directed Clueless, the first two Look Who's Talking movies, National Lampoon's European Vacation, which was one I used to love as a kid as well. It was also, of course, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, written by Cameron Crowe. He's gone on to do okay for himself since as well. But honestly, it has more stars in it than you can shake a stick at. Sean Penn in a very fun kind of surfer dude role. Jennifer Jason Leigh, Judge Reinhold, who probably maybe know better from the Beverly Hills films. Phoebe Cates, Forrest Whitaker, Eric Stoltz, Vincent, I don't know if it's Schiafelli or Schiafelli, who for me will always be Angry Subway Ghost in Ghost, the movie. And a certain young actor in the background in one scene, very brief appearance. He goes under the name of Nicholas Coppola. Those of you who know who he is, quite a famous relative of Nicolas Cage. I think it's got to be there as one of his first roles. There's a few other actors as well who crop up who you'll probably know from Police Academy a couple of years later. You'll see them. It's the classic kind of coming of age story set in a high school. Everything that brings, good, bad, and it's. There were certain scenes in it that I'm now like, I've seen that on social media. There's little clips and bits and pieces from it that have maybe been referenced in other films as well that I now get. It's very much of its time, but it's just fascinating for me to see all these actors way back in the day. What else did I watch? Oh yeah, the last two I watched last night. Bleed for This. That's a 2016 film. I watched it on Amazon. It's based on the true story of World Championship boxer Vinny Pazienza. Somehow, and I just can't believe this actually is a thing, somehow made one of the most incredible comebacks that sport has ever seen. He was in a near fatal car crash where he broke his neck, and a year later was fighting for a world title. It's a good film. It's a good film. It's not outstanding, but it's a good film. And it's sports films. You're often going to have a lot of the kind of generic elements that you're going to have in these sort of films. They have to kind of. It's difficult because it's the true story. You can't really get away from what happened unless you're going to kind of really mess around with it. And Miles Teller plays Vinny, and he's excellent. He's the way we spoke about Jake Gyllenhaal right at the top in Roadhouse. It all hangs around Miles Teller's performance. He is charismatic. He plays this guy who was a good talker, a charming guy, and that comes across. He holds this together really well. He's got good support. Aaron Eckhart is his coach. Kieran Hines is his dad. I think the kind of relationship between those three characters is what really, kind of knits it all together and just elevates it above what would have been a really bog average kind of maybe film. But their performances, I think, take it a little bit more. Directed by Ben Younger, who did Boiler Room. I think he's just got a nice enough touch with the movie that, for me, just elevates it that little bit more. Last one, which I watched really late last night, which maybe explains my views on it. It was on Sky. It's called The Brits Are Coming over here. I think it was called The Con Is On in America. It was filmed in 2015, but it took 3 years to get itself a very limited theatrical run. The wait wasn't worth it. It just wasn't. It managed to make a very starry, fun cast kind of dull. I mean, just read some of these names off here. Tim Roth, Uma Thurman, Maggie Q, Alice Eve, Parker Posey, Sofia Vergara, Crispin Glover, Stephen Fry. But it never makes the most of them all. They all kind of feel like they're in autopilot a bit, either autopilot or hamming it up a bit. It kind of is one of those films that almost thinks it's cooler and funnier than it actually is. It never really gives you the evidence to suggest that it actually is that cool and funny. It's didn't work for me. Just didn't work for me. It's all about a heist and things like that. And hey, if you want to go and watch it, please do. But for me, just such talented actors you've got in there, and it just completely wasted them. Really did. So yeah, that's it really. I'm sorry to end the roundup on a bit of a low note there with a film that wasn't great. But that's, I guess, the way it's going to be. Like I say, this isn't going to be the length of these videos going forward. It's just that there were a bundle of movies I'd watched. I'd imagine it's going to be more half the length of these. You'll probably be delighted about that going forward. And maybe occasionally it'll be about just one movie I'll just focus on and we'll go a bit deeper. It might be one that isn't a spoiler-free one. It might be a real kind of in-depth piece. But yeah. I mean, I guess technically some of these films are older. I could have gone non-spoiler-free on them or spoilery. But it would have probably taken too long, and also there are some people that haven't seen them, so I didn't want to do that. I want to keep to a format for this first one. So we've got plenty coming up in the months ahead, or the next month or so in the cinema. You've got Godzilla, Kong, The New Empire, Monkey Man, Civil Wars coming out as well, Challengers, Fall Guy, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, If, Furiosa as well coming out. So yeah, and like I say, trying to do stuff on them, trying to do stuff on every movie that crosses my eyes as well, just in case. Even if one person thinks, oh, I've never watched that, I might watch that, then I've kind of done exactly what I was setting out to do in that, in all of this as well. So look, I just love the discussion about it. This is the same with, I do videos about football. I love the comment section underneath and the way people discuss and debate movies, what they liked, what they didn't like. And it's the same with the football and people talking about the sport. And I'd love to see that underneath this. People really talking about these movies, talking about other ones, about the other stuff the actors have been in, movies you think I need to go and watch. I am on Letterboxd. I'm on there. I've got an account on there. You can probably see what I've watched there. If there's anything you feel's missing, because I probably haven't got round to rating every single film I've ever seen, please do let me know. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. It's time for me to head off. Who knows, I might just go and watch a movie. Might just do that. So yeah, hopefully this will become a regular thing. We'll see how it goes, see whether people want them or not. But I enjoy just talking about it, as you can probably tell. But yeah, time to head off, and I shall catch you all later. Goodbye.